So, the main cause of our distress and the main obstacle to us feeling happier are intrusive feelings. So, you'd probably like to know a little bit about them, such as, where do these feelings come from? As difficult as it may be to believe, intrusive feelings are actually echoes of feelings we experienced when we were younger. Sometimes it's awful things that happened to us recently, such as being in a terrible accident or being raped. Mostly, though, these intrusive feelings have their roots in overwhelming distress that we experienced when we were young children or babies. As I'll explain later, almost all of us were traumatized when we were young. The situations that traumatize us are not necessarily dramatic from an adult perspective. Trauma and childhood attachment are actually very closely intertwined. And it doesn't matter if we can't remember the traumatizing events. As with trauma that happens in adulthood, such as with soldiers in war or people who are raped, the distress doesn't end once we get out of the situation. We're often left with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the core characteristics of PTSD are the triggering of intrusive experiences and the avoidance of those intrusive feelings, which, as you now know, always makes the problem worse. The same pattern happens when we're traumatized in infancy or childhood, but the ways that we developed to avoid these intrusive feelings will become quite fixed by adulthood. They become part of our personality. Imagine Charlie, who was born to a doting mother. His father was initially happy to have his son, but he became increasingly resentful and angry that his wife was no longer focused on him. Charlie's father began directing his anger towards Charlie, always finding reasons to yell at him and hit him, especially when his mother wasn't around to protect him. Now, imagine how Charlie might feel when he's around men when he grows up. How do you think he'll feel when he's around men with power over him, such as teachers or bosses? Of course, it's perfectly understandable that Charlie's going to feel distressed in these situations. What Charlie is not going to realize is, oh, I'm just upset now because my father used to hit me. I've been triggered, and these feelings have nothing to do with this man who's just doing his job. Instead, Charlie will assume that his fear is due to his boss being a real threat, or that he's a wimp for feeling nervous. In reality, though, we're all Charlie. We go through our lives being triggered into distressing feelings. We have little or no awareness that this is what's happening, and we tend to believe that our distress and unhappiness are due to the situation that we're in. If you have some insight and realize that your distress is out of proportion to the situation, you just might go to see a psychotherapist. And you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find an experienced therapist or a couples therapist who doesn't believe that people's difficulties have their roots in childhood distress. And this is backed up by a growing avalanche of scientific data demonstrating the strong link between mistreatment or distress in early childhood and then later distress in adulthood.